Some Simpsons episodes have only one storyline that we follow all the way through. Some episodes have an A plot as well as a B plot, just as a change of pace, if you will. Springfield, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Legalized Gambling, has like 4 separate plot lines that it juggles throughout its second 2 acts. And somehow, this episode does not collapse under its own weight. It does not feel like a series of random skits either. It's actually kind of a miracle this episode is as great as it is, considering how much they cram into it. I should be throwing around the criticism that Marge's addiction story is underdeveloped, Bart's casino story is pointless, things like that. But I can't. This is one of those rare, unfocused gems that still somehow comes together, even without a Seinfeld-esque pile-up at the end. It's a great example of how to balance a Simpsons family story with one about the whole city. This episode is obviously not unique in how it uses the scope of Springfield as a whole in its narrative. Like, let's consider Marge versus the monorail as a counterexample. That's another one where the town hall makes a decision that drives the action in the second half. That one is arguably more focused with its narrative. It's all about Homer becoming a conductor, which dovetails into the mystery and intrigue of Mr. Lyle Landley. It's all about the build-up and then execution of the scheme. The episode Springfield instead builds its casino almost immediately, and then sets Mr. Burns, Homer, Marge, and Bart loose for their own separate adventures. Obviously, Homer's story merges into Marge's, but it's not like him working as a blackjack dealer actually informs Marge's addiction in any way. It's almost like a precursor to 22 short films about Springfield, with all the quick character moments. Let's go to Grandpa, now Barney, now Krusty the Clown. I think they get away with this because they picked a quote-unquote main storyline that we don't actually have to physically watch that much. Finally, a Marge story where we don't have to be with Marge. But seriously though, they have an understanding that actually watching her gamble would be extremely boring. Like, who would want to watch someone play slots for over 7 minutes? In narrative? Come on. I really like that they picked this gambling addiction story for Marge. It's a little unexpected at first, but it makes a lot of sense when thinking about who she is. She's always the one saddled with responsibility in her family. It's always up to her to make the things happen. Slot machines will be very attractive for this type of personality. She can just leave everything up to Lady Luck. There are no active decisions that she has to make. It's just brainless entertainment. The episode really hits upon the sort of numbness and despondency that happens during a lengthy gambling session. Look at how her body language changes, how she's quick to declare Homer bad luck, how miserably she's waiting for that next hit. It's a nice portrayal of how an addiction progresses without making the whole thing feel heavy and melodramatic. First, Marge gambles. Then they call out her compulsiveness. Then the family notices. Then Marge acknowledges and apologizes, followed by relapse. They don't make it about Marge gambling away their saving account. They don't have Lisa crying alone in her room about being forgotten. This isn't a Lisa versus parent story like Lisa's Pony. We don't have time for that. It's better to keep all the trappings relatively light and make sure they get the progression correct. As a result, Marge stays in character the entire time. She obviously still cares about Lisa's project on a conscious level, she's just succumbing to moments of weakness. It's actually kind of weird they don't show Marge going to the casino that final time. Usually they put in a big moment where she would forget or rationalize that she'll only play $1 or $2. It's a neat narrative choice to not include this character turn, to instead put us in the shoes of Homer and Lisa. We all end up feeling blindsided. Now, Homer is probably the glue that keeps the whole plot together, working between the Mr. Burns casino stuff and interacting with the Marge story. They spin Homer's incompetence at work into a new set of fun moments. Not sure if this joke has aged very well, though. From a characterization standpoint, they lean on Homer's obliviousness and childishness really hard. I think some people might hate Homer's characterization in this one, the way he gaslights Marge and delightfully calls out her gambling problem at the end. But none of these are really jokes about Homer being cruel. It's not funny because it's mean. There's a veneer of dopiness that helps everything out. They do 2 separate scenes of Homer not understanding Marge actually likes gambling. By the second, it's so amazingly comical that he still doesn't notice. Then afterwards, we get all of his domestic stuff, showing off how ridiculously useless and immature he can be. There's still a sweetness to Homer in this one, that he really does want to help his daughter out. He just doesn't really have any of the skills to do it. Oh dear. Yeah, he does make fun of Marge's gambling addiction in the end, but hey, he gets called out. And anyway, it's so over the top, it comes off as more silly than mean. Speaking of mean, Mr. Burns is an absolute delight in this episode, basically perfect in every scene. It's weird, it almost feels like a Mr. Burns episode in the first half, and how we're watching him organize the casino and stuff. He's like the setup guy, and then he goes off to the world of Howard Hughes for the rest of it. These scenes are absolutely great, by the way. Love how they split the Spruce Moose between two scenes, first introducing this insane notion, then escalating it on Smithers. Burns' story escalates pretty nicely in general. We get just enough of it before it gets old or repetitive. This episode does seem to love its flashbacks, however, literally opening with one about Grandpa and Jasper, then going to Mr. Burns' childhood. Then the Gong Show. They even flashback to earlier in the episode. Well, kind of. I love with Mr. Burns how everyone just patiently smiles as they watch him laugh and laugh and laugh. It must be nice being rich. Ironically, if they were making this episode today, they would probably be flashing back to the 1990s as the affluent, booming time in America. It's actually kind of adorable that the first act is all about the crummy 90s recession Springfield was experiencing. Okay, I guess it was only 1993. I should probably give them a break. It wasn't exactly 1999 when this came out. It's just funny seeing a 90s take on a bad economy. Honestly, I can't tell if this whole thing is super dated or way ahead of its time. On the one hand, we have Jerry Cooney showing up, who I only know from being in this episode. But on the other hand, they did unfortunately predict this incident. Funny joke still, but oof. Just oof. It's much funnier when cats attack Milhouse instead. Weird, I wonder if that mirroring was on purpose. Bart's subplot basically has nothing to do with anything else that's going on, like this is literally its payoff, but it's so darn funny and memorable, it doesn't really matter. The way Bart shuts up the squeaky voiced teen, the way Nelson shuts up Robert Goulet. This is actually one of my favorite jokes in all The Simpsons, but for the life of me I've never understood why. Maybe someone can explain this to me. Is it the delivery, the randomness? This scene shouldn't be that funny. The episode does have a lot of really hard-hitting and memorable jokes. Definitely a very quotable episode. But there are a few duds among them. Grandpa playing craps isn't that funny and lasts way too long. The Henry Kissinger thing is just weird. And not to pick on him again, but Jerry Cooney's appearance is just forgettable. I've already forgotten who he is. These are all minor squabbles though. In terms of his jokes, the hit-to-miss ratio for this episode is excellent. I wouldn't necessarily call this like a top-tier Simpsons episode or anything, but I think the sheer amount of structured variety in Springfield is what makes it special. That there's a topical nature to it, that it all falls under this magical bucket of legalized gambling as a discussion point. Maybe a deeper look into Marge's addiction would make for a fascinating character study. I can imagine the alternate version of this story. But I like that we got that big slice of the Springfield community in this one. We get that extra scope and context. The Simpsons is a show where the house always seems to win. We always end up in 742 Evergreen Terrace. So getting that extra context is a nice change of pace. Springfield is exceptional in featuring its amazing cast of secondary characters, but still giving me a fresh look at our favorite family.